The first thing I want to explain is why the frame on our side of the house is the alternative is a reasonable mix. The reasons for this are threefold. One, parents probably want some degree of control because these are people that they have given birth to and they generally feel like they know better than the kids do about how they ought to organize their lives. So parents are still likely to take some control on our side of the house and not, but the this is fairly mitigated to the extent that they don't want to drive their kids away. They don't want to be controlling. They don't want to be abusive. They don't want to just create this emotional distance, be viewed as a distant authority figure, because this makes their own job harder because then the kids listen to them less. The second thing I want to flag is that this starts probably really young, but this expands as kids grow because they see as they grow, they get viewed as more deserving of autonomy and it becomes harder to justify reimposing those controls going on. So if your kid makes a mistake at age 12, at age 13, then you can't at age 17 be like, no, actually, I not control your life. Your college decisions now. The scope of the harms on government side continue to expand. The third thing I want to flag in this frame is that the abuse is likely to be symmetric. This means that on their side, thus abuse is likely to look like complete neglect and just do whatever the fuck you want. On our side, it's look like complete tiger parenting. So abusive parents are going to be abusive regardless on either side of the house. The implications of this framing is that we don't have to defend things like tiger parenting. We don't have to defend like extreme insane control, but just the alternative, which is a reasonable mix of both of these worlds, which is what happens in status quo. This means then that our case is going to be really simple and our path to victory is going to be really clear. We're going to explain to you why some amount of parental guidance and structure is absolutely fucking necessary, and this leads to compounding benefits to your life. And then we're going to explain to you on our side of the house, parenting and teaching becomes a lot easier, and the relationship gets this really emotionally valuable relationship gets a lot stronger in the side opposition. Argument one then: why is it that kids can't make good decisions and parental guidance is necessary? This will explain to you additionally why the imitation claims out of opening government as to why you can just imitate parents are insufficient and why kids are likely to make bad decisions. Reason number one for this is that kids don't know themselves and the direction in which they ought to organize their lives. Their brain capacity hasn't developed and they don't have the life experience to actually know what makes them happy. So me at age 22 knows that I want to pursue a career in cybersecurity because my 3 internships pastly have told me that this is a career that I actually enjoy. But kids don't have this kind of directionality. They only have badly conceived notions of what the world looks like, so they don't understand this. But they also don't know they don't have emotional regulation, they don't have testing data or preference development to the same extent because they don't have that life experience. So they can't direction themselves sufficiently. The second reason is that even if they're able to direction themselves, they don't have the capacity to actually execute this direction, to actually execute their preferences. This is for two sub reasons. The first one is that they don't understand the value of long-term investment because they haven't failed the failure of pain and losing. They lack capacity to know how difficult the world is. So they don't have that fear of, oh, if I don't organize my life effectively, I won't get into a good university, I won't have a good job. Or if I'm not kind to my friends, if I don't sleep on time, I'm not going to be a happy person going into school tomorrow. They don't understand this necessarily to the same extent. But even if they understand this and have that experience built up, so if you're a 14-year-old kid and you like fucked up a sleep schedule and you fucked up an exam, even then they don't have the cognitive capacity and executive control. So things like life management, things like being able to organize yourself, time manage, use Pomodoro or whatever the fuck, use to-do lists. All of these things are things that are actually skills, right? You have to develop this, you have to understand this, you have to become normalized to doing these things. You don't have to have that like I need motivation and that spark and wait for all those things these times. You don't have the capacity to even develop these cognitive defaults. Reason number three, additionally, is that kids don't recognize when they fail. So a kid doesn't know the impacts of not sleeping really well, really fast, because it's not attuned to who they are as a person. So they may just be like, oh, I'll sleep at 2 a.m. tomorrow. It won't really matter as long as I'm awake and can get to school the next morning. But they don't know the long-term health effects and they aren't attuned to their own bodies and their own sensibilities and the lived experiences of others around them to the same extent to know when they're failing. All of these three reasons combined explain to your kids are unlikely to make are very, very likely to make bad decisions with their lives. Why is the comparative a lot better? And there's two things here. Why is it that parents can make better decisions and why is it the other influences that they're likely to fall prey to are really bad? Let's do the other influences first. What are these likely to look like? This is likely social media or movies or friends or whatever the fuck. These are likely to be really bad influences. These are not tailored to their circumstances. These are generally to be very sensationalized and broad advice or to be no Hollywood notions. So like the Hollywood high school movie wherein everything always works out, or it's sensationalized to be dramatic and have toxic relationship with your friends. They're not going to have that kind of good influence on government side of the house. They're going to fall prey to these bad influences because kids are really impressionable. So they're not going to become mini adults and organize their lives effectively. They're going to be very susceptible on either side of the house. We think that the influences on their side of the house are a lot worse. Why are parents then a lot better? This is really simple. They just have more lived experiences. They have more knowledge. They have networks. They have the capacity to learn from their own childhoods. They understand, for example, what you need to have a good job or a good career. They're able to likely have a more holistic understanding of what you need to succeed. So they're likely to enroll you in things like extracurriculars because they know the value of things like sports and community service on college admissions, or even on your own well-being in life in the instance that they're oriented in that way. So parents, we think, are a lot better. The additional reason is parents love their kids, right? So in most instances, even if you're like not the best parent of all time, you probably just love your kid and want them to do well. Like this is just biologically the bond that forms. But let's say all of this isn't true. Like, let's say parents, you don't have some like goated parent, they're not very capacity, they're like whatever. I think even then, most parents still set up common sense habits and rules. They tell you that you should eat good food, you should like eat leafy greens. You don't understand these things as a kid. You don't understand things like doing chores and having the schedule. What then happens when parents are able to even set even this much up is that they become cognitive defaults and it doesn't take mental effort when you grow up. So when you go to that university dorm for the first time in your life when you're old, you don't have to think about, oh, how do I do laundry? How do I achieve this? Before that, a POI from Mahir.
Do you think a slow parent just doesn't feed their kids?
You have to concede that they have less control of what their kids are eating because that's the fucking info side. Otherwise, there's no margin in this. The second argument then on why parenting and teaching becomes really harder. The reason, and this explains to you why the nudges and suggestions from parents are less effective coming out of opening government. The reason for this is really simple. Correcting after the fact is significantly harder than setting up the correct social norms in the first place. The reason for this is twofold. The first sub reason under this is that you have already given this child freedom, so it seems hypocritical and tyrannical and authoritarian to take this control away because you're going to be like, bro, you told me I could control my child. Are you a dumb parent that you like didn't think I would do it well? They're just going to be like, yeah, fuck you. The second sub reason for this is that as a result of this giving this authority in the first place, which is likely to be far more authority than they see any other kid having, they're going to develop a degree of elevated self-perception, a degree of entitlement, a degree of just like, I know what I'm doing. You probably shouldn't tell me what I'm doing because this is like my self-God-given right as a child to do whatever the fuck I want. This means then that they're less receptive to that parenting going forward. The implication of this claim are really simple. One is that parenting becomes a lot more stressful because you don't know what that kid is thinking, you don't have control over it. In instances where they harm themselves or do something bad, you don't have the capacity to actually reach out to them. But the second impact of this is that teaching becomes a lot harder because this becomes then the teacher's job to some extent to do. And these are really important impacts because these are the authority figures that kids spend the most amount of time with. They quietly adopt their actions in the ways, and additionally, these bonds and connections are emotionally necessary. So you need to be able to feel that this person is on my side, is going to take care of me, as opposed to it's just going to neglect me and is not going to take care of me to the same extent. The prerequisite to good parenting is no burnout and no stress and be able to affect and actually enact your preferences. And the prerequisite to education and cognitive development is a good connection with your teachers. And in the instance where you have a huge shortage and the teachers are already burnt out, you've made their job significantly harder. We're so fucking proud to oppose.
Right. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the debate. Here.
Hi, just to check if you can hear me.
Yes.
Get my notes. Okay, so basically the case we have from opening opposition has one big point about kids will make wrong decisions, learn wrong things, and that will be bad in the future. I think they don't like engage with the reason that Catalina gives you why this will tend to be like good decisions, but I will engage with them like very strongly on this. First, notice like, and this very crucial framing, this is not like relevant when it comes to high school and so on. We are mostly talking about like small kids, like very young kids and so on, kids in elementary school and so. Why is that important? Why is that the case? Like first, note that this is where your like behavior and so much is formed. This is where it's most like influential. That's the prerequisite. Secondly, note that at the moment when the kid is in high school, the parent has a lot less influence. It's not like in most cases that parents are scheduling like the schedule of the kid in high school, especially in the sort of high schools that would opt into this. Maybe that happens in very strict high schools with strict parents, but that's not the case that we are debating in this motion. So I don't think, why is this important that these are not like high school? Because like a lot of the first part of their speech is about how the kids don't understand long term and they don't have the experience to make important decisions. But notice, panel, the kids that we are talking about, like young kids, they are not deciding whether to go into cybersecurity or whatever. They are deciding like when they should go to sleep. And like another reason, like look at the examples in the info slide. It's clearly meant for young kids. I think this is obvious. So I don't think that the sort of experience and time management and all of these things matters as much, because the decisions that you are making as a small kid do not impact you in the long run. I think that is clear. Then the remaining part of their case is that you're gonna actually like learn bad things, and later on you're gonna have problems with that. Why is that not true? I will explain by adding another argument. But before that, I want to like strongly engage with like the framing we heard from closing opposition, how you're gonna eat like a lot of candy and so on, like watch the tablet all day. Like let's even say that they are right. In some cases, like that would be covered by the motion. Three reasons why the kids in most cases are not going to do that. One thing is that that's actually not that fun. Eating candy occasionally is great. That's why kids love it. Eating candy like all day makes you feel bad. You don't really enjoy it. You have a diminishing return. You have a tummy ache as a kid. Kids can perceive pain. They can perceive a lack of pleasure. They won't do it. Second thing, it's interesting now because it's something that is not allowed. Like at the moment when you have like limited candy, kids want candy. But at the moment when it's available, also for tablets, it's not really interesting. It's not interesting to watch a tablet like 3 hours in a row. It's actually quite boring. It's only interesting when it is like very harshly limited. And like third reason, notice in high school households where parents don't actually try to engage with their kids and so on, where they don't try to make fun activities or try to take the kid to the park or wherever, they're going to give them the tablet all day either way. So that's like outside of this motion, this motion as well. Now I want to like add stuff to our case. Like first, like why this will actually, and this is where I clash with the remainder of OO's case, why this is like very good for kids in the long run. In these formative years, you will learn crucial skills if your parents are more like lenient and give you like more autonomy and agency. What kind of skills am I talking about? Skills that are very crucial for modern adults that many don't have in the status quo. Things like decision making, like you making choices for yourself, not being decided by others. Second, like consequences. Sure, like OO is probably right that kids can't make a decision what to study for university, but they can definitely feel consequences of staying up too late, then waking up in the morning, they haven't got enough sleep, they feel shitty all day, and then they realize, okay, it's a good thing. Same thing with snacks, same things like with all of these sort of things in the chat. Thirdly, like simply exploration and curiosity, you learning all of these things, you being able to like try out things, what sort of schedule works best for you. These are crucial things that it's much better if you learn when you're young than later. Why is it better to learn these things when you're young than when you're like in high school or university? First, like high school and university are more rigid, more rigid environments where you don't have that much space for exploration. Secondly, like you have harder consequences. Like, and notice this is where we flip the OO case, because if you have to learn these things in high school, then you don't get a good grade, or in university, you don't finish university, you're not as good. That's how we flip them with harder consequences. It's better to learn things at young when things are low stakes. And third reason why it's better to learn it at young, it's more formative when you're young. When you learn this sort of stuff when you're young, you're far better off. Okay, before I continue closing,
your case rests on the unrealistic assumption that children will not be able to build habits on our side, even though we are fostering it from birth. If they are consistently getting good sleep, why is it likely they are suddenly going to stop in college?
No, we get good habits like either way, because as simple as it is, like even very simple animals can understand you not liking something, you liking pleasure, pain, and so on. If you like feel bad after like getting a long night of sleep, even if not the first time, soon you realize it, that you feel shitty as a kid, and then you don't do it. This is the same like mechanism when kids get burned on the stove, they don't touch the stove again because they were hurt. It's really like, it's so intuitive that kids can learn. But plus we have the other things, you making decisions, you have consequences, all of these things. Okay. Now I want to add like one more thing to our case, how this affects parents that are like in the status quo would be extremely strict. Notice how this affects, like some amount of parents will opt into this, but the consequences are not only for them, it's also for how parenting is seen as a whole. When you as society, as a strict parent, see that like a lot of parents are doing exactly the opposite and so on, how does it affect you? Well, one thing, it moves the Overton window of what you find acceptable. Maybe you're not going to opt into that, but you're going to be like more charitable to more like towards like more moderate in the middle ground solutions. Second thing, you have more discussions about it. As this is done, there are like way more discussions. Maybe you as a strict parent, you probably won't buy into it fully, but you can at least see the other viewpoints and have this challenge and so on. And thirdly, now you are reevaluating how you view these sort of things. Why is this important? When we shift the discussion, when we like shift what is done and what is acceptable, we actually affect the very extreme parents that are very extremely strict, because they also love their kids and so on. So what is the effect? It affects that they are more moderate, and this is great because they like my parents and so on are often like harming their kids through being so strict, even though they love them. This means like less burnout, less forcing the kid to go like to like so many extracurriculars that they don't have time for themselves, more autonomy to their children, less resentment between them and their kids. So we also have another group of people that we are affecting, and this is great because we are countering all of the other narratives that exist. And one more frame that is so important in this debate that really like changed the way. Look, probably this method, parenting approach, will work for some people, and for some people it won't work. But we still support it. Why? Because for the people who it won't work, they see that it's not affecting their kids nicely. They're just gonna opt out. They're gonna have 3 months of a bad approach, and then they're gonna leave it. So there's not that much harm. But for the people that see it being successful in raising their kid and so on, those are the people that are gonna stay and keep doing it for years. Meaning that people actually have a choice there. People decide. Those who decide to do this are the people who this is working out for. Parents are rational. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. And to close the opening debate, yellow no, please. Here.
Cool. Give me a second. There's two clear reasons why OG loses, and both of them is because it's like they've forgotten what it was like to be a child to begin with. The first is that they rely on this idea that kids are geniuses with adult functioning brains. The thing is that this is not true for the reasons explained to you. The brain is undeveloped when you're a child. You don't reason properly. This means that you make short-term decisions and chase dopamine versus planning for the long-term future of what is best for you in terms of getting a job, a career, college education, and how to best develop. This means that children often make unoptimal decisions. It's not like they're like, I should sleep at 10 p.m. today because this is the correct thing to do. This beats opening government then. The second, though, is the realistic characterization of what the alternative is. They say it looks like incredibly strict tiger parenting, but this isn't an implements motion where they can say we make and moderate these parents to be better. Instead, we on opposition defend the most realistic alternative, which is balance. Because we explain that parents know everything that government does, but also has the incentive to care for their children and avoid things like backlash or resentment from growing up. So they're able to self-correct from what they learned from their own childhood and use their incentives to create better opportunities for their kids, like taking them to the science center and nudging them in the correct direction. We think their nudging mechanism works very well in opposition. We're able to nudge children to shape their preferences when growing up, to teach them the value of working hard or why it's important to get jobs, go to college or whatever form of education to make sure you're able to make a living. The implication of this is you're able to avoid conflict on opposition early on because you're able to shape their values. That means that they don't change their values or have different values with you later on in the future, which means they listen to you when you restrict things. That avoids the resentment from occurring, but also means we lead to better outcomes on opening opposition then. Okay, refuting their case separate from that. The first is the characterization of the round. I think they take an incredibly soft and defensive stance in this round, where they skirt the burden put on government and in the info slide of explanations of what this often looks like. This is highly uncharitable, and in the end, OG is essentially defending what opposition bents is supposed to. I don't think they can win this round by saying, parents can nudge them, because that's clearly something that stands on our side, or when they say there will be ground rules, like the motion legit says that we will let kids do the leadership of what is actually best for them then. More responses. They say that children will still make optimal decisions, like sleep on time, because they'll realize that this is good for them. Adults can't even do this. We stay on our phones, we get addicted, we scroll TikTok for too long, and we go to work tired the next day. Fortnite is very addicting. I don't think kids are able to make optimal decisions like this. The second thing they say is that kids are going to imitate parental behavior, but they don't engage with our case on how there are other worse negative influences instead. For example, kids at recess at school without parental supervision who do risky, mean behavior or bully other children. But secondly, online sources like YouTube, where you see Mr. Beast, and this often influences what you think is correct, but you end up learning psychological, psychopathic behaviors instead, or other worse influences. That takes down their first argument there. The second thing they talk about is how it's better to not push children because that creates rebellious kids. 3 responses. The first is that if children are likely to imitate what parents do, because as they say in OG, then that means they're likely to respect their parents and listen to them already. So which means that parents are often, when providing reasons for their things that they talk about, kids are going to be like, oh, I agree. I would imitate what you do anyways. I put all my trust into you. So I don't think that resentment occurs that they talk about. The second, though, is that on opposition, I think we allow parents the choice to weigh the amount of rebellion versus the protection. Let's say your child wants to get a tattoo when they're 13 on their forehead. You as a parent can make the decision to say, the rebellion that I'm going to face for stopping this decision is worth it over time because they're going to thank me in the future and this is good for my child's development. Finally, I think kids, even if they're rebellious in the moment, grow up grateful, and that's better. The second impact they run under this is less guilty parents, but this isn't true. I think you feel more guilt on gov. One, parents believe they're doing the right thing when they resist restrict behavior on opposition, to say it is right that I put you in this extracurricular to learn English and work on math and these skills because that's the right thing. So you don't think you feel guilt for this. But the second is you feel worse when you neglect your child. This gets worse in the long term when your children grow up resentful, to not have learned important life skills or be well adjusted, and then get mad at you as a parent for failing them as a child, for not giving them the correct education. Weighing that is much more long-term and irreversible and harmful, and I think that outweighs the guilt that you feel on opening government. Before I continue, I'll take a POI from OG.
Look, it's not that the same kids would alternatively be in very strict households. It's that this has an effect on actually like changing the behavior of very strict parents and so on by moderating it at least to a certain degree.
This isn't how debate works. We're talking about supporting slow parenting. The most realistic alternative in most cases is not strict ass parenting. We explained to you why parents in the most cases are moderate because they care about their relationship with their child, but also about their outcome and why they're the better actor to make that decision. Okay, rebuilding the case then, because their case is dead. Two things. Firstly, on better childhood development, and secondly, on how this is impossible for adults. Building on better development, we explained to you the importance of habit formation. Parents are able to tell kids when to sleep, what to eat their veggies, and all of this. This has massive implications. The first is physical development. It's important to get your sleep and your nutrition so you're able to grow up. This is important for your health so that you aren't stunted and so you can live long lifespans and not actually suffer. Living longer lives is good. Developing and having your brain be fully developed is very important in this round. Secondly is physical safety. This includes online or playing at parks and playgrounds. Children are unable to assess risk properly, which is why you often see them doing dumb, silly things. But adults are therefore able to supervise and help with their physical safety. That avoids really catastrophic harms and injuries, things like breaking your leg or like getting a concussion when you're a child. We think we're able to avoid that. The third is other habits such as like financial literacy. Parents are able to teach their children how to manage their money versus spending it all at Bulk Barn on candy immediately. That helps them create better things and savings in the future to make sure that they grow up wealthier. Fourthly, I think you're able to better make friends when you aren't entitled, because often I think these children who take leadership compared to other types of children who don't have this, when they work together in groups, or even if they're all under the same metric of this type of parenting, are unable to collaborate or make compromises that say like, what should we play with next? Who gets the toy next? That makes it much more difficult for you to make friends, and so you lose out on social connections. Finally, extracurriculars. It's important to go to things like math class and stuff, which helps you grow and develop. To respond to their case, we think that it's not too late in high school to therefore correct their values. And sorry, like it is too late by the time that you get to high school to correct their values. Instead, on our side, it's a gradual process to give them independence slowly. So that looks like, for example, gradually giving it to them in middle school, give them a phone, and then later on let them drive and stuff like this. That means that they're able to develop properly while controlling the amount of risk and giving them guidance. The second thing here is that independence feels better to get than to be born with it and always given and be entitled and assume that you deserve it, rather earning it over time through good activity. So we're better for that then. The impacts here are massive for the development of your child. Weighing this is exclusive because schools don't teach life habits. So things like sleep schedules and stuff. You shape the future of the child better, which leads to long-term better well-functioning, and you avoid irreversible harms, such as of not being able to sleep for a year because you are addicted to Fortnite, or instead, we explained to you why it's so hard to recorrect in the future, because habits and values are already shaped, the neurons fire in certain ways, so it's better if parents shape this early on to get children in the right direction by nudging them at the start. The second case we explained to you is why this is highly difficult for adults. We think the most likely alternative is that the parents are going to give their kids screen time, so access to like iPads and stuff, which is the easiest, which increases their access to things like worst influences. But this also is just incredibly stressful for adults and parents because they have ideas of what is best for their children, but this becomes much more difficult to do. It's also harder to create meals at random times of the day and just create lunch all of the time when you don't actually want to, because your kid ordered up a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. This also happens at school when kids become much more unruly and don't listen to teachers. The importance is that this is a prerequisite for actually being able to parent well, to not burn out and to not crash out all the time because your child is asking for things. But also on scale, there's often more parents than children, so this obviously has heavy weight in this round. And we beat guilt because guilt is symmetric or worse than long-term regret, but stress is not, and stress is unique to opposition. Oppose.
Great. Thank you very much, DLO, for those very fine remarks. Moving on now to the closing half, and that starts with member of government. Here.
Okay. I'll take POIs through like verbally. I'm not looking at chat, so if you all for one through there, I won't see it and we'll both be side. Unmute, say POI. Bro, why is my copy paste not working? Okay. So I spent a good amount of time racking my brain around what we could feasibly defend on Gov and still be on Clash. And then OO dissipated all of my concerns by running balanced parenting as their alternative. If they can do that, I think we can as well. I think slow parenting in its most potent and undiluted form maybe looks like what Top Half discusses. At its best, it's this responsible, laissez-faire style of parenting where you're allowed to make mistakes, but it is that your parents are still around to nudge you towards making good decisions. At its worst, you run into gentle parenting when it is that there's some feckless, slow parent that can refuses to control 8-year-old Timmy, as it is that he's throwing a tantrum in the toy aisle because it is that her parents refuse to buy them a new Minions toy. In the vast majority of instances, though, for parents that have the incentive to and ready access to a diverse range of resources and perspectives on parenting, slow parenting probably just represents another, for lack of a better term, political force that pushes parents away from helicopter parenting and towards allowing children to make their own decisions. And the premise of the CG extension then is this, that slow parenting is just another force that encourages the average parent to let their child exercise greater control over their lives. This results in less parent-child resentment stemming from children who
POI.
denied things like preference satisfaction by parents who thought that they were looking out for their best interests. That's the most important thing within the round. Before that, some miscellaneous responses to what it is that Op has already said. Then I'll tell you why it is that, in the absence of a strong slow parenting narrative, the average parent probably has a broad structural incentive to be involved in their child's lives, perhaps to an excessive degree in many instances, and why it is that that broadly produces more resentment. One, that it is that children aren't developed enough to form their own opinions or have their own preferences probably means for the vast majority of time during prepubescent ages, they just defer to their parents to make decisions for them. And even when it is that they are capable of forming their own preferences, their consumption is still budget constrained by their household. Their parents aren't going to blow all of their food budget on candy and McDonald's when it is that they still need to feed themselves. And slow parenting doesn't stipulate that it is that you adopt your own child's lifestyle. So for this most formative age of a child's development that it seems that it is an OO is so concerned about, when it is that they are running a case that is focused around oh, this is going to affect the child's development trajectory. Probably the same on either side of the house. I don't think that much changes. Two, for the busiest and most absent parents, I think that it is that they are sufficiently occupied and detached from parenting discourses on either side of the house. So absent parents are still probably going to be absent. If you want to argue that it is that there are absent parents that are going to listen to slow parenting discourses and feel validated and say actually it's totally fine what it is that I'm doing right now. At least that it is that slow parenting discourses are probably going to provide some sort of resource on guidance on how you best can do it effectively. So even in those instances, I would say that the quality of parenting probably marginally improves when it is that there is a style of parenting that it is that people think that it is that they can actually buy into because it is that they are constrained by time or they have other things that it is that they're preoccupied by. I think that it is as people have said within the round, parents broadly have incentives to make their children like them, to treat them and raise them well. It is that those parents are also going to share those opinions or those tips and tricks on what it is that has worked for them online, and other parents are going to read those things and probably institute them to try and better improve the quality of time that it is they spend with their kids when it is they're able to do it. Okay, I think the average parent, in the absence of a strong slow parenting movement, has the broad structural incentive to become increasingly involved in their child's lives to the extent that it becomes excessive. And this can manifest in different ways that I'll talk about later. But the reason why, primarily, is because people are becoming increasingly selective about their decision to have children and to become parents because of the rising cost of living that is endemic to things like the rise in population, which means that it is that there is greater labor market competition, those sorts of things. People are generally not inspired to have children when it is that they are already struggling to take care of themselves, or when it is that they recognize that they would have to make a substantial temporal and financial opportunity cost in order to raise a child. They'd have to give up on their own career aspirations. They'd have to do things like relocate to an area that has good schools and daycare. To have to change diapers instead of make money and fuck bitches. I think that it is that the types of people that still want to become parents oftentimes have that incentive because it is that they have some sort of romantic ideal of what it looks like to be a parent. And these are the types of people that I think are more willing than not to enforce behavioral expectations on their children to meet that ideal of what a happy and successful family looks like. And as it is an opening opposition says, right? Parents think that they know better. They think that they have more experience. They think that it is that they're more mature. So they're going to make decisions that it is that their children oftentimes aren't going to enjoy, and they're going to, dissuade concerns that it is their kids have by saying oh, actually, I'm looking out in your best interest by enrolling you in a bajillion extracurriculars that it is you actually don't really care about. I'm going to force you to spend a lot of time on your academics, and it isn't, I'm going to do things impose penalties if it is that you don't get straight A's or whatever. I'm going to reprimand you because I think that ultimately this is going to make you a more competitive job applicant in the future. That means that it is that you're not going to become homeless. You're going to be able to sustain yourself, those sorts of things. This happens even when it is that parents are well-intentioned. Maybe it's risk aversion, maybe it is that parents are just delusional, but my parents were legitimately convinced, and they legitimately convinced me that I would end up homeless if I would never get a job, if I could never get into a good college, if I didn't have straight A's on my fucking middle school report card. Like, I think that it is that parents thinking that it is that they know best are going to intervene and make a series of like decisions that maybe individually seem insignificant, but it is that there's going to be one decision that is particularly significant that produces a large amount of resentment, or it is that is cumulatively going to build up and it's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, where it is that children are just like, okay, I never really got the opportunity to do the things that it is that I want, and that makes me sad, and I blame you for it because you forced me to do all of these other things. Why is it that helicopter or like tiger parenting produces resentment? Two things. First, children didn't ask to be born, and this is an increasingly prominent sentiment as like the quality of life that it is that people are able to enjoy when these hyper-competitive market conditions is like getting worse and worse. But two, it is that they're denied preference satisfaction for things that it is that they wanted to do. And maybe it becomes that it is that children feel like they are robbed of the opportunity to enjoy their childhood innocence. And it is that they connect that to their present cynicism or depression, which they then blame their parents upon. Maybe they feel like they were robbed of meaningful relationships when their parents didn't allow them to form them because they deemed those people to be bad influences. Sorry, before I continue, I'll take a POI from opening.
Government bench, if you read the emphasize to defend entire leadership be given to children, but we explained why teams.
Yeah, you didn't listen to my introduction. I would refer you to that. Like, yes, in its most potent form, slow parenting is going to look like that. But as you acknowledge within your own case, when you say that your alternative is balanced parenting, people are not going to singularly listen to one resource. They're going to take multiple opinions and compile them together. I think that it is that in that, flurry, slow parenting represents a force to encourage your child to be more autonomous. You didn't listen to my introduction. Cool. On why it is that I think resentment is like the most important thing. I think that it is that there are far more corrective pressures to the things and the problems that it is that opening opposition describes. Like if it is that you have a bad work ethic, maybe that's the sort of thing that improves when it is that you need to develop a good work ethic to be able to get a job or to be able to get good grades in the future. When it is that you have a bad, sleep relationship or whatever, that's also the sort of thing that there are corrective pressures for you to address within the future. I would say that it is that there don't exist the corrective pressures for you to mend a broken relationship with your parent. And this is the sort of thing that I think is quite important within the round, not just because it's irrevocable, right? Like there's no other way. If you fuck your relationship with your child, there aren't many pressures to force you to go back together. Like therapy is fucking expensive, those sorts of things. But I think that the reason why this is important is because this is something that ostensibly matters to both the parent and the child. The parent wants to have a good relationship with the child. The parent also, the child wants to probably have a good relationship with their parent. This is the sort of thing that best allows parents to fulfill that. Proud to propose.
Great. Thank you very much, Member of Government. And continuing the debate now, opening the case and closing opposition, Member of Here.
Okay. He and pronouns, I'll take POIs verbally. Just get set up. I think the most deeply unsatisfying thing about the round so far is just the utter lack of likelihood analysis. Because if we're being perfectly honest, it is a coin toss at the end of the day as to whether a kid ends at the end of their childhood phase, on CG's case, with resentment for their parent or love that they shaped them into a good person. But equally, to be real, like it's a coin toss as to whether kids make bad decisions per OO's very limited analysis. Like, sure, social media exists, why is it bad? Sure, kids can choose to put their hand on a stove, but why are they likely to do this? At the end of the day, CO is going to very cleanly win by filling in the massive gaps in OO case as to why kids are likely to make bad decisions, and instead of just asserting that this is something that's going to irrevocably affect the rest of your life, we're going to prove it far more robustly with a couple extensions there. But I want to start with refuting the closing government extension. I'm going to do this very simply. I want to make two observations. The first thing is what I already said in my intro, which is this, that you should weigh this argument incredibly, incredibly low because of the lack of analysis as to why kids will actually end up resenting their kids. They say that there is a chance that you feel like they curbed your friendships too much, or there's a chance that you feel like they influenced you too much. But again, like it's unclear as to whether kids will actually do this when very simply, if you end up at the end of your life with a good job or end up as a well-socialized person, it's unlikely that you feel this intense amount of resentment against your parent. But the second observation I'd like to make is just a whole bunch of weighing yet again, because quite simply, I don't see why we exactly care about the worst case impacts on CG nearly as much as what we're going to be telling you throughout the opposition bench. That is very simply that they say that the relationship that you have with your parents is like irreplaceable, that there's no way for you to correct this later in your life. But like equally, there's no way to correct it if you are in no capacity to self-regulate for the rest of your life, which is something we're going to far more meaningfully prove in our extension. And equally, we would suggest that it is actually, and maybe this sounds counterintuitive, but very easy to fulfill the relationship that you have with your parents in other ways at our impossible worst. That is to say that as you grow up, there are plenty of people on either side of the house who grow to resent their parents anyways. There are probably plenty of parents who grow to resent, or people who grow to resent their parents on Gov because they didn't raise them to be a functioning fucking human. Like, sure, there's plenty of resentment on either side of the house. What is far, far less reversible and far, far less replaceable is your core ability to function as a human being. And that's why I think OA had a pretty good direction. But before I move on to our actual extensions, let's point out the massive flaws that they go about improving this. I want to just bring up a few things. The first thing is that I think it's very hand-wavy when they explain the way that basic things like, for example, eating or sleeping are later going to translate into far more important life decisions around college. So like, sure, if you're playing a Fortnite for an hour and every day, I don't understand why you can't simultaneously do things like get a good job or make good decisions, and that's not something they prove terribly rigorously. Equally, they don't prove that social media is likely to be bad, and finally, I don't think their sort of mechanisms on habit development are nearly as strong enough to prove that, again, this is something that actually translates to the rest of your life. Notice that, to be real, this is a really high impact, really high burden claim. They needed to do far, far better to do that. That's why our analytical extension is going to take the day. Let's move on to our first extension then. Why is it so crucial that any sort of structure is introduced to parents, from parents to kids at an early age? And here we're actually willing to concede some of the characterization that OG never does, because we are going to be willing to say that even if it is the case that we're talking about literal helicopter parents on our side of the house, that this actually avoids far less disastrous consequences than occur on side government. With that in mind, why is it so important that habits are introduced at all from parents at a young age? The first thing I want to do here is do what OO never did, which is explain why the likely counterfactual when you don't have these strong influences is actually going to be bad. There are 3 reasons why kids are actually likely to make bad decisions. The first one is on synaptic pruning. And here we're going to actually take on the impossible burden from OG when they say things about like putting your hand on the stove or staying up impossibly late, which seem counterintuitive for anyone to do. The reason why kids are likely to do this in a way that OO never recognizes is because of the nature of synapses within your brain when you're born. When you are born and a young child, there are many synaptic connections that exist in your brain, and you have a high degree of neuroplasticity. There are strange interlocking relationships between your pleasure sensors and other types of physical sensations. Notably, these get pruned over time when parents make decisions for you. So, for example, when you're scolded for doing something, this is actually what later sometimes prunes off the erroneous pleasure relationships that exist. So, for example, it isn't actually a given on the margin that there are some things that cause some degree of pain that you will actually stop doing. So when OG asserts that you're going to not do sort of naturally stupid things, this is actually things that maladjusted kids do. It looks like things like self-harm being more probable in cases where kids saw less interaction from their parents because synaptic pruning just didn't occur. Let's give a few illustrations then for what it looks like. Again, it looks like scolding your kids for doing things that are broadly bad. It looks like taking ownership over their lives so they never experience the kinds of or like discover those kinds of erroneous links to begin with. So for example, if a child discovers self-harm at a particularly young age accidentally, and because the parents are just not interfering in their life as much, not looking at what they're doing, for example, this is likely to lead to something worse. And I want to be very, very clear here that we're not going to say that on side government, like a kid comes and their parents have a ton of like scars on their arm and the parents going to do nothing. Notice that these things start impossibly small. They start with very, very small interactions with pain and erroneous receptions that later lead to terrible links in your mind when you have more established and built up reliances on bad tolerances as you age. This applies to virtually every single bad influence, from drugs to, again, self-harm, to everything that we tell you on our side of the house. Okay. This is why habits are so crucial. The second part of this extension is on neuroplasticity. in the part of the CG case, which I just think the worst, they say that at least on their side of the house, you can adjust for this later. So when you're a teenager, or when you're an adult, you're able to overcome those bad sort of habits that you might have established earlier. OO asserts that this doesn't happen, but here's why it actually doesn't happen on the government side of the house. It's because neuroplasticity decreases. And this is the exact same thing, and I'll extend my earlier mechanism just on neuroplasticity or on synaptic pruning, which is that this just doesn't happen because your mind is far more set and you effectively do that pruning yourself, except in damaging ways, and it's impossible to correct for habits. Very briefly then, on the second extension, why is social media actually likely to be bad? There are two things I want to talk about. First of all, it is necessary for content to be incredibly extreme in order to break through the noise. And that's why challenges like the Momo Challenge or Tide Pods actually got seen by millions of kids. OO's case at the end of the day honestly just amounts to a coin toss as to whether things are bad. We tell you that it's structurally likely that social media is bad, that the most extreme things are the most attractive to kids, and that you're actually neurologically incredibly likely to discover bad and incredibly harmful habits. That's why it's so necessary for parents to intervene, obviously.
Great. Thank you very much, Member of Opposition, for those very fine remarks. Now I'd like to call upon the government whip to continue the debate. Here.
Am I audible, visible, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Shit. I'll start on my first word. The world is tending towards parents becoming generally more capable parents overall. But as a result, because there's more competition, there's pressures from society, all the things that Simon has said. But it also means that they have become more demanding parents than they have ever been before. I think the memes about boomers having infinite freedom have some degree of truth in them. Slow parenting is a necessary corrective mechanism that we need now, and it is important because it repairs relationships that would otherwise be very toxic that parents have with their children for the rest of their life. I'm going to go over a little bit of what Simon said in rebuilding, comparing it against what we hear out of opposition and our opening side. So the first thing we talked about is why in the status quo, the alternative is likely to be parents who are the first thing we said is why parents are generally good decision makers. And I think this breaks the deadlock between opening government and opening opposition. And because the reasons for why parents are capable are quite simplistic. Because opening government says parents are going to be good decision makers because they care about their kids. Opening opposition says they don't want emotional distance. But I think this is the same thing with different font. The reason Simon breaks this deadlock is by analyzing the structural forces that affect all types of parents. Because let's face it, even if you think you're a good parent, even if you think you want the best for your parents, not everyone is able to actually actualize that. The fact that there are structural forces that has lifted all boats and made parents in general better parents, independent of what parents want to do as individuals, means that this analysis breaks the deadlock in favor of light government. The second thing Siren broadly said is talking about why parents are becoming more strict. Obviously, if people are having fewer parents and fewer people are having parents, and most likely parents are kids are being born to older parents. So when they're further along in their careers, this generally means that they're pouring more money into each individual kid. And as a result, children are facing more and more pressure to live up to the expectations that are now much higher than they have ever been before. This magnifies opening government's harms of parenting, which is strict. Because although opening government doesn't want to stand behind tiger parenting in many instances, I think we significantly magnify the harms they talk about. What are these harms? Bad relationship with food, anxiety. It is one thing to be a teenager and not want to eat broccoli, but it is another thing to have eating disorders and other sorts of harmful things for the rest of your life, insofar as parents are becoming much more strict than they have ever been before. I think this magnifies their harms. I want to then talk about some of the things we hear out of side opening opposition. I want to respond to them in a very simple way here. The motion talks about parents making decisions in favor of their children. This motion is not about parents educating their children. This is something which is symmetrical on both sides. What is the difference between educating and parents making decisions for you? Educating is providing guidance, telling you that broccoli has nutrients, it has lower calories, it has fiber, so you don't have diarrhea. It means that you can go out,
You know
you
why?
encourage your children to go out and play in the fields because it's good for you, because you'll have fun and you make friends. Ultimately, the final decision is up to the children on our side of the house. Whereas on their side of the house, the final decision of what kids end up doing is up to the parents themselves. So I think a lot of the decisions, a lot
You
of
know
the
why?
benefits they talk about are contingent on education and not decision making. And education is something that happens on both sides of the house. The next thing I want to talk about then is decision making. There are two types of decisions parents make for their children. Simon already identifies the first one, which is a very basic level of decision making. Whether you go to school, whether you're wearing clothes, whether you're eating adequate nutrition, for example. And parents will probably, unless they're like absolutely crazy parents, as government benches already talked about, they're going to make these decisions broadly in similar ways across all parents. They're going to deflect to what everyone else is making. Like, I don't think this encourages parents to not send their kids to school, not feed their kids or house them properly. Parents will always do that. This motion is about complex decisions, whether parents sign you up for extracurriculars that you do not want, whether they sign you up for school
why?
you do not want to go to. That is the kind of decision making that this motion is about. Why then is it very harmful when that happens on the side opposition? And this is extending off of Simon's argument here. The reason this happens much more likely on their side, keep in mind, is on their side, the end impact of Simon's argument is that parents are going to be making much more of the decisions in much more overbearing ways.
Point.
So the thing I want to talk about is, does it matter if parents make your decisions for you if you do not want them? It is very likely that your priorities are going to be misaligned with what your parents want. The reason is very simple. They grew up in a different time. They have different objectives. They have different social circumstances. And often parents have competition between each other because they want to show to other parents that they're a more capable parent than them. This generally means that they're going to sign you up for extracurriculars and make you do things which you otherwise would not want. Does it matter if your parents egg you into being a doctor if you do not want to be a doctor? So the debate way of saying this is that utility does not matter insofar, and the reason choice precedes utility is because the reason things have utility is because we use our choice to give them utility. We allow the preference maximization of kids, and the only reason that kids are able to maximize their preferences is because we give them the ability to do that. So like, if Simon wants to fuck off and be like an artist or something, he's able to do that on our side of the house. And he's able to maximize his own version of utility because that's what gives them happiness, and it doesn't give his parents happiness.
why?
Sure, I'll take Olu.
So we explained how education is insufficient, how we form habits and get teamwork so that kids can still have autonomy, but with the guidance of parents. Can you weigh with their impacts on better development, which really matters in the demanding world that you characterize, and extreme stress for parents and teachers who have to listen to their child's whims?
Yes. So if you have the logical continuation of a world without slow parenting, it means that kids eventually stop listening to their parents. They cut off their parents because parents were extremely overbearing, signing up for things they do not want to do, putting them in situations that are too stressful. This is a logical prerequisite to actualizing any of the benefits you talk about. Because if it is true that these kids don't end up carrying on any of the advice you give them for the rest of your life, it means that all of that advice was mute. Insofar as on our side of the house, you have a much better relationship with your parents, it means that you're actually able to actualize and put into effect the knowledge and guidance they give you. So we flip that claim on children making better decisions, and this is a gap that was under-analyzed at opening government as well. Because opening government talks about why, kids will listen to their parents because kids won't listen to their parents if you're too strict. But I think this goes above and beyond because this eliminates the most toxic forms of relationships. I'll take CO.
The way that
Sorry,
kids end up
Mark,
listening to their parents about important decisions. Oh, okay,
sorry.
never mind.
My bad. Yeah, so the reason we weigh above opening government is because opening government has undercredited this idea of what it means to shift the Overton window. It was a 20-second liner. Simon analyzes this in great detail. It is extremely important. Very proud to propose.
Right, cool. Thank you very much. So sorry for missing that 6 mark, but yeah, please use your own timer. But thank you indeed, Government Whip, for an excellent speech. And to close the overall debate now, up with here.
Okay. I'm assuming everyone can hear me because we introduced ourselves earlier, so I'll just start. Any POIs are fine. Yeah. We win this debate very simply. At the end of the day, even if the comparative is learning through nurture on our side versus learning through their mistakes but still learning on their side, our counterfactual of nurture is much more effective and sufficient because it builds habits into those children from the start rather than having it very riskily hoping they learn through a mistake and having it done far too late in their lives for those habits to actually be ingrained into that person. With all of the psychology things that Liam told you, I think we've given plenty of evidence why it is good to start early. On this basis, I'm incredibly proud to oppose. There's two themes I want to talk about in this speech. The first is on cognitive development, where I'll very quickly take down CG, and then I'll engage with the crux of the case, which is the physical development of the child, which I think our opening also misses. On cognitive development, then, I want to point out very quickly that their characterization on CG is that you are counteracting helicopter parenting. I think this is very unrealistic, or at least not the tipping point, because in the status quo, there are several narratives that already oppose helicopter parenting. So, in the very worst case, even if this is true, we do not think this has any significant impact to enough of an extent for their weighing to hold any merit. But in fact, we think the opposite is true, where this in fact normalizes neglectful parenting. But regardless of whether or not you buy this flip, we would say that at the end of the day, it's not a narrative motion, it's a supports motion, which means we're debating whether or not the inherent nature of this parenting style is effective, so their case still holds no merit. But what they do tell us is that helicopter parenting is much more pervasive because the world is too competitive. In our very worst case, even if it is true that the world is or that this helicopter parenting is much more common or parents are more demanding. If it is true that the world is so competitive, then that means that demanding parenting becomes a necessity if you want a good future. I sure am glad my parents pushed me if it means I get to go to a great university like Harvard. I think at the end of the day, I'm able to access benefits in the long term from my parents pushing me that leads me to be much less resentful of my parents in the long term. And we're definitely willing to sacrifice the short-term suffering of perhaps doing something against your will as a child in the first place, if that means we get actual financial success and emotional stability in the long run. I think this weighing easily takes down everything that CG tells you. But let's quickly then talk about what OO says. I think very importantly, they bring up this idea that you do not understand the life impacts of things like time management, which is why helicopter parenting, even in our worst case, can still be effective. This is extremely important, but notably also not the tipping point, because schools probably foster this to an extent. We outweigh this because we talk about the physical development and safety outside of academia that provides supplementary positive influences, which schools already do on our side of the house. Before I move on, I'll take your POI very quickly from opening.
Yeah, I think we all agree that parents care for their kids, love them, and want what's best for them. The thing that none of the oppositions engage with is the frame that if the parents notice that this is causing bad things like slight self-harm or bad for their kids, they're gonna stop doing this and move to another approach. Like, I think this is very clear.
I think this is taking the very worst and most extreme characterization of what all of opposition has already told you. I think obviously a parent will take action if they see their child self-harming, but that was never what we tried to tell you. What we tried to tell you is that this slowly builds up unhealthy habits that are outside of the view of the parents, or at least in the peripheral view of the parents, where it is very difficult to counteract this if you start off by giving them the autonomy to make these bad choices for themselves. I think this actually brings me perfectly to my second theme then, on the physical development of the child. Before I talk about influences then, let's talk about this idea of learning new skills and consequences. I think they are mechanistically sound, right? A parent will intervene if you can see immediate harmful effects, and you will probably not put your hand on the stove if you get burnt. This works for extremely small or extreme things, but in many cases, the negative effects are not immediately visible, right? Most of the time, the mistake a child is making is not just putting their hand on a stove, but is consistently not getting proper sleep, or it's consistently having a different schedule for when they are eating, when they are sleeping, and that builds up implicitly. So it is not an explicit and proximate harm that you are able to quantify to the extent that opening government tries to characterize. So to that extent, parent intervention on their side is completely inapplicable because you are unable to see these things. But secondly, I think their comparative was extremely nebulous from the start. They gave you like 3 full minutes of mitigation from the very first speech of the Prime Minister, where they tell you, oh, like, it's okay, like, children are still going to listen to their parents to some extent, we can limit their options, etc., etc. But here's the thing. When they try to tell you that if parents don't force their child, the child will follow the steps of their parents, that is like completely the opposite of reality, right? That is not the actual comparative at all. What Liam uniquely clears up to you is that children require nurture. A child born into flames thinks the world is on fire around them because they immediately follow a directional like influence. What this means then is that they are likely to make more like short-term, or they're likely to take more risks where they can see short-term benefits. So you see things like short-term positive fulfillment because they flock towards proximate impacts they can immediately experience. So the joy of killing someone in Fortnite and being able to get a victory royale is prioritized over doing your homework and getting smarter because they are able to only access the nice benefit of the crown on their screen, whereas they cannot see the good grades and they cannot see the future ahead of them. And notably, we also think this means that there are things like proximate impacts like peer pressure and perceptual factors that exist regardless of whether or not you buy this claim, because we think that like a 5-year-old wants to look cool in front of their friends. So if they think Fortnite is the way to look cool, you probably want to look cool and you'll play Fortnite as much as possible, which is very bad for your development. But what this notably means then is that children are unable to process for themselves the physical harms, and it's the responsibility of the parent to nurture. What they try to tell us on government is that you are able to educate them. But look, a 5-year-old is not going to care or understand what the macronutrients of like an egg is versus candy, right? I don't think a 5-year-old cares about calorie count. This was such an unrealistic claim to have made in the first place. But lastly, like, not only does OO correctly point out that they ignore the info slide as a whole, but also let's talk about how infeasible these parenting approaches are in their mitigation anyway. They try to say that you can limit the child's options by making them choose between like 10 different things. But what happens when that child goes to preschool and sees a vending machine full of chips and bright rainbow candy? They're probably going to buy that. And in the info slide, it said that the parent allows the child to have what they want. So as soon as they have any visible access or exposure to those options, they're going to flock towards them. And we think, in fact, hiding those options from them initially makes them even more attracted to the very least healthy and very worst possible choices in life to be made. On this basis, very proud to oppose.
Great. Thank you very much, Opposition Whip, for those very fine remarks. And that's the end of this debate. Excellent. So thank you so much, everyone, for that. Please stand by in this room. Yodhel, if we can go to room Wellington and deliberate there, that'd be great. And